Doesn't mean we actually know what it is or what it's doing. 3 Atlas is weird. It looks weird. It moves strangely. It's made of weird stuff. And for all of the time that we've spent studying this object, there is a new indication that it might have actually been studying us for even longer. Let's begin with some recent images of 3 Atlas that were captured by astrophotographers in the remote desert of Namibia, on the southern tip of Africa. This is already an incredibly dark place on Earth, but the photographers were able to take advantage of a lunar eclipse where the shadow of the Earth blocked out any sunlight from reflecting off the moon, essentially creating the darkest sky possible, and therefore the clearest view into outer space. They could have pointed their cameras at anything at this point, but they chose to look through the viewfinder for 3I Atlas, and what they saw was shocking. The object was glowing bright green in the night sky. Now, based on what we know about 3 Atlas, it should not be turning green, or at least there is no natural explanation right now for it to be green. You see, the prevailing theory among scientists and astronomers is that 3 Atlas is an interstellar comet, meaning it's generally the same as all of the other comets we see flying around. Around it is a large, bright, fuzzy halo of gas and dust. That's the coma. And it also has a big fan-shaped tail as well. However, this comet is also unique because it came from a completely different star system in a faraway galaxy, so we are expecting it to be a little weird. But the problem with 3 Atlas is that it keeps doing things that just don't make sense. For example, it's not actually unusual for a comet to turn green. And because this is pretty normal, we know a lot about the chemical process that creates the green color. It occurs when carbon molecules in the coma are exposed to sunlight's ultraviolet rays. Specifically, this happens to diatomic carbon, or C2, which is just 2 carbon atoms that are bonded to each other. As a result, if 3 Atlas were a typical comet, it would have numerous carbon structures all around its surface and turn green when exposed to sunlight. But we know from observations that were made over the summer using pretty much every major telescope in existence that 3I Atlas is actually deficient in these carbon chain molecules. There's no C2 in it. And yet it is clearly glowing green. So why is that happening? We don't know. Aliens, yeah, maybe they just like green lights. Now, we also know that the coma surrounding the 3I Atlas is filled with CO2, which is carbon bonded to oxygen atoms. CO2 is not the same as C2. It does make the object incredibly bright, but that would not turn it green. And the presence of that much CO2 alone is also pretty strange, because it vastly outweighs the amount of H2O or water vapor in the coma, which is basically the opposite of an average comet, because they typically have a lot more water than CO2. Except that's not the only weird thing in the coma of 3I Atlas, because it's also full of metal, particularly nickel. And again, this is not exactly unusual for a comet, but it is weird for 3I Atlas to be doing it right now. Metal is present in the composition of many comets, and sometimes that metal will evaporate into the coma. However, this only occurs when the comet is extremely close to the sun, where there is sufficient heat to vaporize metal. 3I Atlas is not very close to the sun, and the presence of nickel was first observed when it was still out in the distance between Jupiter and Mars. So there's no reasonable explanation as to why it's releasing a bunch of metal, specifically nickel, unless you were to entertain the theory that 3 Atlas is an alien spacecraft, in which case rocket engines are typically made from metal alloys that are high in nickel content. And when you burn those engines, a lot of nickel tends to end up in the exhaust gas, a lot of CO2 as well. Of course, this probably isn't aliens, but there's also something weird happening with the way that 3 Atlas is moving through the solar system, probably unrelated to rocket engines that may or may not exist. But what's interesting is the trajectory and velocity of 3 Atlas has remained almost perfectly consistent for the entire time that we've been observing it. Since the object was first spotted in early May up until right now in October, it has not sped up, slowed down, or changed direction by any meaningful amount. That might not sound weird, but if this were a comet, then it should be moving around a lot more. You see, comets heat up as they approach the sun, which causes them to melt, or technically to sublimate, which is what happens when a solid transitions directly into a gas. And the release of that gas tends to push the comet around in space like a thruster. So, a typical comet will change velocity and direction depending on what side is being exposed to the sun. We call that movement non-gravitational acceleration, or NGA, and we typically measure the average distance of variation that occurs in one day. As we've seen, 3I Atlas has been doing a lot of sublimating already, including a mini tail that formed in the direction of the sun, which has now begun to evolve into a longer tail that is facing away from the sun. And yet, on a daily basis, The velocity and trajectory of 3I Atlas has only fluctuated by about 1.12 km of NGA per day. Let's compare that with 2I Boris, the most normal of the interstellar trio. It was measured to fluctuate over 100 km per day, about 100 times more movement on average than Atlas. Now, one potential explanation would be that Atlas is bigger and therefore harder to move. Makes sense. But we can bring in another point of comparison. This is Hale-Bopp. It's one of the biggest comets we've ever discovered in our solar system, at least as big as 3 Atlas, if not much bigger. We saw Hale-Bopp move around by an average of over 10 kilometers of NGA per day. Again, roughly 10 times as many as Atlas. And Oumuamua blows them all away. It was shifting its course by more than 1,000 kilometers per day at times. So even when compared to other interstellar objects, 3 Atlas is moving in a very strange way. It's holding such an unusually steady course that you could almost say it's intentional, as if it's being guided through the solar system. Now, there's probably a natural explanation for that. But let's just say that if 3I Atlas is a ship that is being steered, then not only can it hold a course, but it could theoretically also change course whenever it wants. Right now, we expect that 3 Atlas will end up being on the opposite side of the Sun from the Earth, as it passes through the inner solar system. Therefore, unless 3I Atlas is able to slow down as it passes by the Sun, and we find it waiting for us on the other side, neither will we be able to see it up close, nor will it be able to see us. I have a crazy idea for you that might actually be true. Do you know what the WOW signal is? It was discovered in 1977 by astronomers at Ohio State University who are using something called the Big Ear Radio Telescope. It's like having a big ear that looks for strange things in space. And on this one day, it found something so weird that the person reading the data just wrote the word WOW on the paper printout, hence the name. What shocked them so much was this incredibly powerful narrowband radio signal that lasted for 72 seconds and originated from a point deep in outer space. We know that it didn't come from any of our technology. It did not originate from any planet in our solar system or the Sun. The only thing we know for sure is that it came from the Sagittarius constellation. Now, the first thing that stands out about the WOW signal is the incredible amount of energy it would have required to blast out a narrowband radio frequency across interstellar space. It would have to have been created by a civilization that was so advanced that it could use the power of a star. Or if it was a natural phenomenon, then it must have been created by some kind of activity inside a star. Now, the second important thing about the WOW signal has to do with hydrogen, which is the most abundant atom in the known universe. And there's this thing called the hydrogen line. It is a radio frequency that hydrogen atoms create. That's a big simplification. But all you need to know is that the frequency of the hydrogen line is 1420 MGA-Hz. Additionally, the WOW signal's frequency is, you guessed it, 1420 MGHz. So if you were trying to send a very simple message into the galaxy in a way that any other civilization with advanced knowledge of science would recognize, that's probably how you would do it. And in the 5 decades since then, we have never detected another radio signal that has looked anything like that. Anyway, the reason why this is interesting is because astronomers have been able to reverse engineer the trajectory of 3I Atlas, and we're pretty sure that it also comes from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, the same general direction of the WOW signal. That is a pretty big coincidence, and it's got some people thinking that maybe the real origin of the WOW signal wasn't some distant star, but it might have come from our new visitor 3 Atlas, which in the year 1977 would have been on the outer edge of our solar system, far beyond the orbit of Pluto. Maybe it just wanted to give us a heads up that it was on the way. Of course, that is just a theory, one that hasn't been proven to be true and probably never will be. But it also hasn't been proven to be false either. And that's probably the most important thing to keep in mind as we learn more about 3 Atlas. This kind of thing makes it necessary for us to remain open to the infinite possibilities that exist in the universe. There is the truth, and it is heading our way.